She was 8 months pregnant when her billionaire husband forced her to her knees. Right there, on the cold marble floor of their Manhattan penthouse, in front of his mistress. And he made her apologize. But what he didn't know, her phone was recording everything. 47 days later, that recording played in a federal courtroom. 12 million people watched live. And what the judge ordered him to do next, it shocked the entire nation. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about a woman who was broken down to nothing and rose up to destroy the man who tried to destroy her. By the end of this story, you will witness the most satisfying moment of justice you have ever heard. Stay with me until the very end. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens in that courtroom. And if this story moves you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling me what you think. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Now let's begin. The words sliced through the penthouse like a razor blade cutting silk. Get on your knees. Charlotte Weston stood frozen in the marble foyer of her Manhattan home. Her husband's voice was ice, pure crystalline ice, the kind that burns when you touch it, the kind that leaves scars. She was 8 months pregnant. Her ankles had been swollen for weeks now. Her lower back ached with every breath she took. The baby had been kicking all day, restless and agitated, as if sensing that something terrible was about to happen. The foyer was magnificent. 20-foot ceilings, Italian marble floors imported from Carrara, a chandelier that had cost more than most people's houses. Charlotte had decorated every inch of this penthouse herself, had chosen every piece of furniture, every painting, every throw pillow. Now it felt like a prison. Graham Holt stood 6 feet away from her. His jaw was set hard. His eyes were empty, cold, dead. Behind him, lounging on the ivory settee that Charlotte had picked out 3 years ago during their honeymoon in Paris, sat Sienna Cross. The other woman. Charlotte had suspected for months. The late nights at the office that stretched into early mornings, the canceled anniversary dinners, the way Graham's phone was always face down on every surface, the perfume she sometimes smelled on his shirts that was not her own. But suspecting and knowing are two very different things. She had found the texts that morning. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, stretching back years, not months, years. I said, get on your knees. Graham's voice was harder now, more commanding. The voice he used in boardrooms when he was closing a deal. The voice that made grown men tremble. Charlotte's own voice came out as barely a whisper. Graham, please, can we just talk about this? Can we go somewhere private and discuss what's happening? There's nothing to talk about. He stepped closer to her. His cologne filled her nostrils. Armani Code. The same cologne she had bought him for their 3rd anniversary. The same cologne that now made her want to vomit. You accused Sienna of lying. You humiliated her in front of my business partners at lunch today. In front of people who matter. I didn't humiliate anyone. Charlotte's hands instinctively went to her belly. Protective. Maternal. I simply asked her to stop touching my husband. I asked her to show him respect for our marriage, for our family. Sienna laughed from the settee. It was a sharp, tinkling sound, like champagne glasses shattering on a marble floor, like breaking glass. See, Graham? Sienna said. Her voice was honeyed poison. Sweet on the surface, deadly underneath. I told you she was jealous. I told you she would make a scene. It's honestly pathetic. A pregnant woman waddling around making accusations, so undignified. Charlotte felt her chest tighten. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was not happening. This could not be happening. She was carrying his child. They had been married for 4 years. She had given up her career as a marketing executive, her friends, her entire life in Boston, to move to Manhattan for him. She had given him everything, and this was what she received in return. Graham grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh with bruising force. She knew there would be purple marks tomorrow. 5 little ovals where his fingertips pressed too hard. You will apologize to Sienna, he said. His breath was hot on her face. And you will do it on your knees, like the ungrateful wife you are. Graham, I'm pregnant. Charlotte's voice broke. She hated how weak she sounded, how small. I'm 8 months pregnant. I can barely bend down to tie my own shoes. The doctor said I need to be careful, the baby. Then this should be a good reminder to watch your mouth in the future. He pushed down on her shoulder, hard. Charlotte stumbled. Her left knee hit the cold marble floor first. Pain shot up her leg like lightning. Then her right knee followed. The baby kicked hard inside her, protesting the sudden movement, the stress hormones flooding Charlotte's bloodstream. She caught herself with one hand on the floor. The marble was so cold, so hard, so unforgiving. She looked up at her husband, the man she had loved, the man she had trusted, the man she had built a life with, the man whose child was growing inside her. He looked down at her like she was nothing, less than nothing, like she was dirt on his expensive Italian shoes. Sienna rose from the settee. She walked over slowly, deliberately, her red-soled Louboutin heels clicking against the marble like a metronome counting down to an execution. She was wearing a red dress, Valentino. Charlotte recognized it from the spring collection. It probably cost $15,000. Probably paid for with money from the joint account that Charlotte had foolishly thought was theirs together. Now apologize, Graham said. Charlotte's eyes stung, but she would not cry. She absolutely refused to cry. Not in front of them, not like this, not on her knees on her own floor in her own home. I'm sorry, she whispered. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, like poison, like betrayal. Louder. I want Sienna to hear you properly. I'm sorry for accusing you of lying. Sienna smiled. It was the cruelest expression Charlotte had ever seen on another human being's face. There was no warmth in it, no humanity, just pure, unadulterated triumph. See, Sienna said to Graham, reaching out to stroke his arm possessively. She can be trained after all. Like a doe. Maybe there's hope for her yet. They laughed together, standing over her, while she knelt on cold marble at 8 months pregnant, while their baby kicked inside her, while her knees ached and her heart shattered into a million pieces. But what neither of them knew, what neither of them could possibly suspect, was this. Charlotte's phone was in her cardigan pocket, the soft cashmere cardigan she had put on that morning because she had been cold, because pregnancy made her temperature fluctuate wildly, and the voice memo app was recording. The red light blinked against the fabric, invisible to them, but capturing every word, every cruel syllable, every moment of calculated humiliation. In 47 days, 12 million people would watch this recording play in a federal courtroom. 12 million people would hear Graham Holt say, "Get on your knees." 12 million people would hear Sienna Cross laugh. 12 million people would understand exactly what kind of monster Charlotte had married. But Charlotte did not know that yet. All she knew was the cold floor beneath her knees, the ache in her back, the baby moving restlessly inside her, and the sound of their laughter echoing off the 20-foot ceilings. Graham stepped back. Get up, you look pathetic down there. Charlotte struggled to her feet. It was not easy. Her center of gravity had shifted months ago. Her belly made everything awkward. Her knee throbbed where it had hit the marble. Her back screamed in protest. But she stood. She would always stand, even when they pushed her down. I'm going out with Sienna tonight, Graham said, already turning away from her, already dismissing her. We have dinner reservations at Per Se. Don't wait up. Per Se, their restaurant, the place where Graham had proposed, the place where they had celebrated their anniversaries. Now he was taking his mistress there. The baby could come any day now, Charlotte said. She did not know why she bothered. The doctor said I shouldn't be alone. What if something happens? Graham did not even look at her. Call your mother. That's what she's for. They left together. Sienna wrapped around Graham's arm like a designer accessory. The door clicked shut behind them. The lock engaged with a sound that echoed through the empty penthouse like a gunshot. Charlotte stood alone in the foyer she had decorated with such hope, such love, such naive belief in the future they would build together. The nursery was down the hall. She had spent 3 months designing it. Pale yellow walls, the color of sunshine. A white crib imported from Sweden, handcrafted from sustainable wood. A mobile with little silver stars that played Brahms when you wound it up. A rocking chair by the window where she had imagined nursing their baby while watching the sun set over Central Park. She had spent weeks picking out every detail, imagining the family they would be. the laughter that would fill these rooms, the love that would grow with their child. Now she understood. There was no family. There never had been. There never would be. She was a business arrangement, a means to an end, a vessel for the Holt heir. Nothing more, nothing less. Charlotte walked to the bathroom, slowly, carefully. Each step sent pain radiating through her knee, up her leg, into her hip. Her back muscles were cramping. The baby was still now, completely still, as if even her unborn daughter understood that something terrible had just happened. She looked at herself in the mirror. The mirror was framed in gold. It had cost $12,000. Graham had insisted on it. "Only the best for my wife," he had said, back when those words had seemed like love instead of ownership. Charlotte's face was pale. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. Her hair, which she had styled so carefully that morning, had fallen from its pins. She looked old, tired, defeated. But she was not crying. She refused to cry. She pulled out her phone, stopped the recording. 3 minutes and 47 seconds. 3 minutes and 47 seconds of evidence. 3 minutes and 47 seconds that would change everything. Her hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped the phone. She did not know what to do next. She did not know where to go. She did not know how to make sense of what had just happened. Her mind was spinning, thoughts crashing into each other like cars in a pileup. So she did what she always did when the world was falling apart. What she had done when her father died. What she had done when she lost her first job. What she had done every time life became too much to bear. She went to the parking garage, got in her car, a Mercedes SUV that Graham had bought her when she got pregnant. "You need something safe for the baby," he had said. Another gift that now felt like a chain. And she sat there. For 23 minutes, Charlotte sat in her car in the darkness of the underground garage. The concrete walls pressed in around her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell of exhaust and rubber filled her nostrils. She did not cry. She could not cry. The tears were there, somewhere deep inside her, but they would not come. It was like her body had shut down, gone into survival mode, locked away the emotions that would destroy her if she let them out. She just breathed. In, out, in, out, in, out. Her hands rested on her belly. The baby kicked again. Softer this time. Gentler, like a question, like reassurance, like a tiny voice saying, "I'm still here, Mama. We're still here. Whatever happens next, we're in this together." As Charlotte looked down at her belly, at the swell of new life beneath her cashmere cardigan, at the future that was still growing, still becoming, regardless of what Graham Holt had done. "I know," she whispered into the silence of the parking garage. "I know, baby girl. Mama's going to figure this out. I don't know how yet. I don't know when. But I promise you I will figure this out." She did not know how. She did not know when. But in that moment, sitting alone in a dark parking garage with her whole world crumbling around her, Charlotte Weston made a decision. She was done being invisible. She was done being obedient. She was done being the perfect wife to a man who saw her as nothing more than an acquisition, nothing more than a stepping stone, nothing more than a means to an end. Somewhere into the back of her mind, a voice whispered. It was her grandmother's voice. Eleanor Weston. The woman who had raised Charlotte after her father died when she was 16. The woman who had taught her to bake apple pies from scratch and balance checkbooks by hand, and never ever let a man make her feel small. When someone shows you who they are, her grandmother used to say, her wise old eyes twinkling with hard-won wisdom, believe them the first time. Don't wait for the second time. Don't make excuses. Don't tell yourself it will get better. Believe them. Graham had shown her exactly who he was tonight. Charlotte believed him now. She started the car. The engine purred to life. She pulled out of the parking spot, drove up the ramp, emerged onto the street. Manhattan glittered around her. A million lights against the darkness. The city that never sleeps. The city where dreams were made and broken every single day. Charlotte did not know where she was going at first. She just drove. Past the towering skyscrapers of Midtown. Past the glittering storefronts of Fifth Avenue. Past Central Park, dark and mysterious in the night. And then she knew. Brooklyn, Harper. The only person in the world who had never lied to her. The only person who had always told her the truth, even when the truth was hard to hear. The only person who would know what to do. Charlotte merged onto the Brooklyn Bridge. The cables stretched overhead like a cathedral. The East River flowed black and silent below. In the rearview mirror, Manhattan grew smaller. The penthouse, the life she had built, the lies she had believed. She did not mourn it. She did not look back. She was too busy planning her escape. Harper Finley opened her door at 11:47 at night. She was wearing pajamas with little cats on them. Her red hair was piled on top of her head in a messy bun. She had clearly been asleep. But the moment she saw Charlotte's face, every trace of drowsiness vanished. She stepped aside without a word. Charlotte walked into the small Brooklyn apartment. It was nothing like the penthouse, 500 square feet instead of 5,000. Furniture from IKEA instead of custom Italian designers. Books everywhere, stacked on every surface. Because Harper was a librarian and books were her religion. But it smelled like lavender and old paper. It smelled like safety. It smelled like home. "I'll get the wine," Harper said. Then she paused, looking at Charlotte's belly. "Wait, you can't have wine. I'll get the ice cream." Charlotte sank onto the worn couch. Her body ached everywhere. Her knee was already turning purple beneath her maternity pants. Her back felt like someone had run over it with a truck. Her head was pounding with a headache that had been building since she first saw those text messages. Harper returned with 2 pints of Ben & Jerry's mint chocolate chip and 2 spoons. She handed one of each to Charlotte. Then she sat down on the other end of the couch, curled her feet beneath her, and waited. That was the thing about Harper. She never pushed. She never demanded. She never filled silence with meaningless chatter. She just waited, patient and present, until you were ready to speak. They had been friends since freshman year at Boston University. Charlotte had been a wide-eyed girl from Connecticut, overwhelmed by the city, by college, by being away from home for the first time. Harper had been her randomly assigned roommate, a scholarship kid from a small town in Maine who had never met anyone with a trust fund before. Or, they should not have become friends. They had nothing in common. But somehow in that tiny dorm room with the cinder block walls and the mattresses that smelled like disinfectant, they had found each other. 20 years later, Harper was still the first person Charlotte called when everything fell apart. Charlotte took a breath. Then she told her everything. The suspicions that had been growing for months, the text messages she had found that morning on Graham's iPad, the confrontation at lunch, when she had asked Sienna to stop touching her husband in front of business associates, coming home to find Sienna lounging in her living room like she owned the place, Graham forcing her to kneel, the recording on her phone. She told it all, every detail, every humiliation, every word that had been spoken, every laugh that had cut like a knife. Harper listened without interrupting. Her face grew darker with each detail. Her knuckles went white around her ice cream spoon. But she did not speak. She just listened. When Charlotte finished, the silence stretched between them. The city hummed outside the windows. A siren wailed in the distance. Someone in the apartment above them was playing jazz, the saxophone notes floating down through the ceiling like smoke. Finally, Harper spoke. "I've been biting my tongue for 3 years, Charlie." Her voice was tight with barely contained anger. 3 goddamn years. Ever since that rehearsal dinner, when I watched the way he looked at the waitress, when I saw how he talked to the valet, when I noticed that he never once asked about your dreams, your life. Charlotte stared at her. "You never said anything. Because you were happy, or you thought you were happy, and I didn't have proof of anything, just a feeling, a bad feeling that got worse every time I saw you." Harper's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But I knew, Charlie. I knew something was wrong with him. Graham Holt is a narcissistic piece of garbage wrapped in a custom suit. He's a predator who dresses like a prince, and I'm just sorry it took this long for you to see it." Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest. She had been so afraid, so terrified that Harper would judge her, would ask her why she had stayed so long, would make her feel stupid for not seeing the signs that now seemed so obvious. But Harper did none of those things. She just handed Charlotte another spoon of ice cream and said exactly what Charlotte needed to hear. "You're not crazy," Harper said firmly, her gaze locked on Charlotte's. You know what you saw. You know what he made you do. Don't let anyone ever make you doubt yourself." Charlotte nodded. Her throat was tight with emotions she could not name. "I'm not crazy," she repeated. The words felt strange in her mouth, like a prayer, like a promise. "I know what I saw. I know what he made me do." They sat in silence for a moment. The ice cream was cold and sweet and exactly what Charlotte needed. The apartment was warm and safe and full of the smell of old books and dried lavender. For the first time in hours, Charlotte felt like she could breathe. Then Harper sat up straighter. Her expression shifted from sympathy to determination. Charlotte recognized that look. It was the look Harper got when she was solving a problem, when she was figuring out a puzzle. "Okay," Harper said. "We need to figure out how deep this goes. You said you found texts on his phone, but that was just today, just what you happened to see. What if there's more? What if this has been going on longer than you think?" Charlotte had not thought about that. She had been so shocked, so devastated by what she had found, that she had not considered digging deeper, had not considered that the betrayal might go back further than she could imagine. "The iPad," she said suddenly. Harper raised an eyebrow. "What iPad?" "Graham has a family iPad. He set it up years ago so we could share photos and calendars and shopping lists. But he forgot that it syncs with his iCloud, his messages, his photos, his browsing history. It all backs up automatically." Harper was already on her feet. "Do you know the password?" "Our anniversary, August 14th. Harper snorted. "Of course he would use your anniversary as the password to the device that stored evidence of his affair. These men are always so arrogant. They never think they'll get caught." They found the iPad in Charlotte's overnight bag. She always kept it with her, had gotten in the habit of checking Graham's schedule so she would know when he would be home. Now she was grateful for that habit. Charlotte's fingers trembled as she typed in the password. The screen unlocked. The familiar home screen appeared, with its icons for photos and messages and calendars. She opened the Messages app. The text loaded, slowly at first, then faster, cascading down the screen like a waterfall of betrayal. Hundreds of messages, thousands of messages, all from Sienna, all to Graham, stretching back not months, not a year. 2 years. The affair had been going on for 2 years, since before their wedding. "Oh my God," Harper whispered. She was reading over Charlotte's shoulder. Her face had gone pale. "Charlie, look at this one." Charlotte looked. Her heart stopped. The message was dated 3 weeks before their wedding day, June 21st. Charlotte remembered that day. She had been at her final dress fitting. She had been so happy, so excited, so completely, blissfully unaware. Sienna had written, "When are you going to tell her? I'm tired of waiting." Graham's response, "After the baby's born. I need the heir first. The Weston name, the connections, the legitimacy. Once I have that, we'll figure out the rest. Just be patient." Charlotte stared at the screen. The words blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. The heir. That was all her baby was to him. An heir, a line item on a corporate spreadsheet, a continuation of the Holt dynasty, a strategic acquisition. He had never loved her. He had never wanted her. He had wanted the Weston name, her family's connections, her mother's money, her father's legacy, the doors that would open, the deals that would close. Because Graham Holt had married into American aristocracy, Charlotte's father had been a federal judge, one of the most respected in the Second Circuit. His name still carried weight in legal circles, even 10 years after his death. Her mother came from old money, Ellsworth money, the kind of fortune that had been building for generations. Graham had seen an opportunity, and he had taken it. Charlotte was not a wife. She was an acquisition, a merger, a hostile takeover disguised as a love story. Charlotte sat on Harper's bathroom floor. She did not remember walking there, did not remember getting up from the couch or crossing the small apartment or closing the door behind her. But suddenly she was there on the cold tile floor, surrounded by Harper's toiletries and towels and the detritus of an ordinary life. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She needed to do something, anything, something to make the shaking stop, something to make her feel in control of something, anything at all. She started organizing Harper's medicine cabinet. It made no sense. She knew it made no sense. But her hands needed to move. Her mind needed something to focus on that was not text messages and betrayal and the ruins of her marriage. She arranged the pill bottles by height, tallest in the back, shortest in the front. She alphabetized the labels: Advil, aspirin, Benadryl, melatonin. She folded the washcloths into perfect squares and stacked them in a precise tower. She lined up the cotton balls in neat rows. She organized the hair ties by color. She straightened the toothpaste tubes so their labels all faced outward. It was absurd. It was ridiculous. But it helped. Harper found her there 20 minutes later. She did not say anything at first, just sat down on the cold tile floor next to Charlotte. Let the silence stretch between them. Let Charlotte organize and arrange and control something, anything in a world that had spun completely out of her control. Finally, Charlotte spoke. "He never loved me. I know, honey. He used me. I know. I was so stupid, Harper." Charlotte's voice cracked, but she still was not crying. The tears would not come. The signs were all there. The way he talked about my family like they were assets in a portfolio. The way he always made sure to mention my father's name at parties. The way he pushed for a baby so quickly after the wedding, before we had even found our rhythm as a couple. Charlotte finally looked at her friend. Her eyes were dry, but they were haunted. "I was a business merger. That's all I ever was. A business merger dressed up in a white dress." Harper took her hand, squeezed it tight. Her grip was warm and strong and real. "Listen to me," Harper said. Her voice was fierce. "That's not your fault. None of this is your fault. He lied to you. He manipulated you. He's a predator in a $3,000 suit. And predators are good at hiding what they are. That's how they catch their prey." She squeezed Charlotte's hand harder. "You didn't see it because he didn't want you to see it. Because he spent years crafting a mask, and he only took it off when he thought you were too trapped to leave. That's not stupidity. That's being victimized by a professional." Charlotte nodded slowly. The words made sense. They were logical, rational, true. But they did not make her feel better. "What do I do now?" she asked. Her voice was small, lost. "Where do I go from here?" Harper's expression hardened. The softness was gone. In its place was determination. Steel. The same look she had gotten when she was fighting for funding for her library, when she was defending a challenged book, when she was standing up for what was right. "First," Harper said, "we save every single message on that iPad, screenshots, cloud backup, email them to yourself, everything. Multiple copies in multiple places where Graham can't touch them." Charlotte nodded. "Then we find you the best divorce lawyer in Manhattan, someone who isn't afraid of billionaires, someone who knows how to fight dirty when they need to." "Graham knows all the best lawyers." Charlotte's voice was hollow. "Half of them are on retainer for Holt Industries. The other half are scared of him." "Then we find someone he doesn't know, someone outside his world. Someone who has nothing to lose and everything to prove." Charlotte thought about that. Someone who was not afraid of Graham Holt. Was there such a person anywhere in Manhattan? Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. A text from Graham. "Don't bother coming home tonight. Sienna's staying over. Find somewhere else to sleep." Charlotte stared at the message. Something shifted inside her. The fear was still there. The hurt was still there, bleeding and raw and terrible. But something else was rising up beneath them. Anger, pure, clean, righteous anger. Graham thought he had broken her. He thought that forcing her to kneel had crushed her spirit forever. He thought she would come crawling back, grateful for any scrap of attention he deigned to give her, begging for forgiveness, apologizing for being inconvenient. He was wrong. Charlotte typed out a response. 3 words. Simple. Final. "Keep her. Good luck." Then she blocked his number. Harper looked at the screen. A slow grin spread across her face. "There she is," Harper said. "There's the Charlie I remember. The Charlie who got a 4.0 GPA while working 2 jobs. The Charlie who told off that sexist professor junior year. The Charlie who never backed down from anything." Charlotte did not feel like the Charlie she remembered. She felt like someone new, someone harder, someone forged in fire and pain and betrayal. But maybe that was okay. Maybe she needed to become someone new to survive what was coming. Because she understood now this was not going to be a quiet divorce. This was not going to be a civilized uncoupling. Graham would fight her with everything he had, his money, his lawyers, his power, his connections. But she had something he did not. She had the truth. She had evidence. She had a recording that would destroy him. And in 45 days, that truth would bring him to his knees, just like he had brought her to hers. The Ellsworth brownstone had been in Charlotte's family for 4 generations. It sat on a tree-lined street in the Upper East Side, surrounded by similar brownstones owned by similar families with similar legacies. Old money, quiet money, the kind of wealth that did not need to announce itself because everyone who mattered already knew. Charlotte's mother, Margot Ellsworth Weston, had lived in this house her entire life. She had been born in the master bedroom upstairs. She had married Charlotte's father in the garden out back. She had raised Charlotte and her brother within these walls. She had buried her husband from the parlor and kept living, kept enduring, kept surviving. Now Charlotte sat across from her mother in the formal sitting room. Tea grew cold between them in bone china cups that had belonged to Charlotte's great-grandmother. The winter sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug that had been in the family since before the Civil War. Margot was 58 years old. She had silver hair that she refused to dye because she believed gray hair was a badge of honor, proof of battles survived. She wore pearls every day, even to the grocery store, even to walk the dog. And she had the kind of quiet composure that came from generations of breeding, from a lifetime of being taught that emotions were private and dignity was everything. But beneath that composure was steel. Charlotte had seen it when her father died of a sudden heart attack at 52. When the vultures circled, the distant relatives and opportunistic lawyers who thought a grieving widow would be easy prey. Margot had handled them all. Quietly, efficiently, ruthlessly. Not a single one had gotten a dime of Weston money that they had not earned. Charlotte had told her mother everything. The affair, the messages, the kneeling, the recording, all of it laid out in the cold light of morning in the house where Charlotte had grown up believing that love conquered all and marriage was forever. Margot had listened without expression. Her face had remained perfectly composed throughout the entire recitation of horrors. Only her hands, gripping her teacup a little too tightly, betrayed any emotion at all. When Charlotte finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily. A car horn honked somewhere outside. Life continued, indifferent to Charlotte's pain. Then Margot spoke. "I had Graham investigated before your engagement." Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands went cold. Her heart seemed to stop beating. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Margot's eyes met her daughter's. They were the same shade of blue, the same shape. Charlotte had always thought she looked like her mother. Now she wondered if she had inherited her mother's instincts as well. And if so, why had those instincts failed her so completely? "I hired a private investigator," Margot continued. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Regret, guilt, the kind of pain that comes from knowing you could have prevented something terrible and chose not to. "I spent 3 months having Graham's background examined, his business dealings, his personal life, his history with women." "Why didn't you tell me?" Charlotte's voice was raw, wounded. "If you knew something was wrong." "Because I found nothing concrete." Margot's composure cracked for just a moment. Her voice wavered. Her eyes glistened. There were irregularities, patterns. Women who had worked for him who left suddenly and refused to explain why. Settlements that were sealed by the court. Non-disclosure agreements that no one would discuss. But nothing I could prove. Nothing that would hold up in court. Nothing that would convince a woman in love that her fiancé was a monster. Charlotte stared at her mother. The woman who had always protected her. The woman who had always been right. The woman who had let her walk down the aisle to a man she knew was dangerous. "You knew something was wrong with him." Charlotte's voice was flat, empty. "You knew, and you let me marry him anyway." "You were so happy, Charlotte. A single tear escaped Margot's eye. She wiped it away quickly, almost angrily, as if ashamed of the display of emotion. You were so in love. You came home from that first date practically floating on air. You talked about him constantly. You planned your future together. You were happier than I had ever seen you since your father died. Margot's voice broke. And I had no proof, just suspicions, just patterns, just a feeling that something was wrong. I convinced myself I was being overprotective, that I was seeing ghosts where there were none, that I was projecting my own fears onto your happiness. Charlotte wanted to be angry. Part of her was angry, furious, betrayed not just by her husband but by her own mother. But mostly she just felt tired. So deeply, bone-achingly tired. It doesn't matter now, Charlotte said finally. What matters is what we do next. Margot nodded. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a business card. It was cream-colored, thick, expensive. The kind of paper that cost more per sheet than most people's hourly wages. Bennett Shaw, she said, sliding the card across the table. He's the best divorce attorney on the East Coast, possibly in the country. He's handled 3 of the most high-profile divorce cases in the last decade. Cases involving politicians, CEOs, professional athletes, men with unlimited resources and armies of lawyers. Charlotte picked up the card. The name was embossed in gold. Simple, elegant, confident. He's never lost, Margot added. Does Graham know him? No, Bennett doesn't move in those circles. He doesn't need to. He doesn't advertise. He doesn't network at charity galas or country clubs. His clients come to him through word of mouth, through people like me, through referrals from other attorneys who know that when a case is unwinnable, Bennett Shaw is the one who can win it. Charlotte looked at his mother, really looked at her, saw the lines of worry around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the guilt that she was trying so hard to hide. You've been planning for this, Charlotte said. It was not a question. I've been preparing for this, Margot corrected. There's a difference. I hoped I would never need to give you that card. I prayed every night that Graham would prove me wrong, that my suspicions were just the paranoia of an overprotective mother, that you would be happy. She paused, swallowed hard, but I kept the card anyway, just in case, because that's what mothers do. We prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. 3 days later, Charlotte sat in Bennett Shaw's office in Midtown. It was on the 34th floor of a glass tower that overlooked Central Park. The walls were lined with law books and framed newspaper articles about cases he had won, headlines about settlements that had made history, about powerful men who had been brought low, about justice that had seemed impossible until Bennett Shaw made it possible. Bennett himself was 45 years old. He had salt and pepper hair and the kind of face that gave nothing away. His eyes were dark, observant, missing nothing. His suit was expensive but not flashy. Everything about him projected quiet competence, absolute confidence, and an iron will. He listened to Charlotte's story with his hands folded on his desk. His expression never changed. Not when she described the affair. Not when she talked about being forced to kneel. Not when she pulled out her phone and played the recording. Get on your knees. Graham's voice filled the office, cold, commanding, cruel. Charlotte watched Bennett's face as the recording played, looking for some reaction, some hint of emotion. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A muscle in his cheek twitched. The recording ended. I apologize for accusing you of lying. Charlotte's voice, trembling and broken, faded into silence. Bennett was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Mrs. Holt. Weston, Charlotte interrupted. I'm going back to Weston. I never want to hear that name attached to mine again. Bennett nodded once. There was respect in his eyes, maybe even admiration. Ms. Weston, he said, what your husband did constitutes emotional abuse, coercive control, and given your medical condition at the time, potentially reckless endangerment of both you and your unborn child. The recording is admissible in New York State Court. We have some of the strongest laws in the country against intimate partner coercion. What about the messages? Charlotte asked. The ones proving he planned this from the beginning? They suggest a pattern of premeditation. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a man who snapped under pressure. Graham Holt planned to use you from the moment he met you. The marriage, the pregnancy, the timing. It was all calculated, all deliberate. Charlotte had known this, but hearing it stated so plainly in such clinical legal terms made it feel more real, more terrible, more final. "What can we do?" she asked. Bennett leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "We're not just going to divorce him, Miss Weston. We're going to expose him. Every carefully constructed lie, every manipulation, every woman he's hurt before you. The public is going to see exactly who Graham Holt really is. And when that happens, all his money and power and connections won't be able to save him." Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight for so long, she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. For the first time in days, she felt hope. "Won't he fight back?" she asked. "He has more money than most countries. He has connections everywhere. Politicians owe him favors. Judges play golf with him. Media companies depend on his advertising dollars." "He does," Bennett agreed, "and he will use all of it. He will try to destroy you. He will attack your character, your sanity, your fitness as a mother. He will drag your name through the mud and spend millions doing it." He paused, smiled. It was a wolf's smile, predatory, confident. But money and connections only go so far. The truth has a weight of its own, and when that recording plays in court, when those messages are entered into evidence, when the world sees what he did to his pregnant wife, no amount of money will save him. Public opinion will turn. Investors will flee. His precious reputation will crumble. Charlotte nodded slowly. She wanted to believe him. She had to believe him. "There's something else," she said, "something I need you to understand before we go any further." "What's that?" Charlotte placed her hands on her belly. The baby kicked, strong and steady, as if agreeing with what she was about to say. "I'm not doing this for revenge," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I'm not doing this because I want to hurt Graham. I'm doing this because my daughter deserves better. She deserves to know that her mother didn't just accept being treated like property. She deserves to grow up in a world where women fight back, where they don't kneel." She met Bennett's eyes. "I want my daughter to know that no matter how powerful someone is, they can still be held accountable. I want her to know that the truth matters, that justice is possible, that no one, no matter how rich or connected, is above consequences." Bennett was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like emotion. "That's exactly the kind of client I like to represent," he said finally. "Let's get to work." They spent the next 3 hours going through everything: the timeline of the affair, the messages from the iPad, the recording on Charlotte's phone, her finances, her assets, her prenuptial agreement that Graham had insisted on, and that Charlotte now realized was designed to protect his wealth, not their marriage. By the time Charlotte left the office, her head was spinning. But she also felt something she had not felt in months, maybe years: hope. She stepped out onto Fifth Avenue. The city rushed around her, indifferent to her pain, oblivious to her transformation. Taxis honked. Tourists took photos. Business people hurried past with phones pressed to their ears. Life continued. The world kept turning, and somewhere up there, in a penthouse that now felt like a prison she had escaped, Graham Holt had no idea what was coming for him. Charlotte pulled out her phone, checked her messages. There was one from Harper. "How did it go?" Charlotte smiled. For the first time in days, it felt genuine. "We're going to war," she typed back, "and we're going to win." Graham Holt did not take the divorce filing well. Charlotte learned this 3 days after she met with Bennett, when she received a phone call from her personal banker at Chase Private Client Services. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Holt." The banker's voice was professionally apologetic, the kind of tone they must teach at banking school. "But we've received a court order. Your personal accounts have been frozen pending resolution of a legal dispute." Charlotte's hands went cold around the phone. "I don't understand. Those accounts are in my name only. They have nothing to do with my husband or our marriage." "I understand, ma'am, but there's been an emergency motion filed with the court. Something about misappropriation of marital funds. Until the courts sort it out, we're legally prohibited from processing any transactions." I'm very sorry. Charlotte hung up. She sat in her mother's guest room, where she had been staying since the night of the kneeling, and stared at the wall. The wallpaper was a delicate floral pattern, roses and peonies intertwined. She had picked it out herself when she was 16, right after her father died, when her mother had let her redecorate this room as a distraction from grief. Now she was 32 years old and hiding from her husband in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by flowers that suddenly seemed to be mocking her. Graham was trying to starve her out, trying to cut off her resources, trying to make her dependent on him again, trying to force her back under his control by taking away her ability to survive without him. Charlotte called Bennett immediately. "It's a standard tactic," Bennett said. His voice was calm, unruffled, as if he had expected this exact move. The first thing an abuser does when he realizes he's losing control is attack the victim's finances. It's controlling behavior 101. Take away her money, take away her independence, take away her options. "But I have no access to anything now. The baby's due in 3 weeks. I have doctor's appointments. I have bills. I can't even buy groceries." "Your mother has set up a trust," Bennett replied. "I spoke with her attorney this morning. You'll have access to funds within 24 hours. Graham's lawyers can file all the motions they want. They can bluster and threaten and waste the court's time. But they can't touch money that isn't marital property. The Ellsworth Trust predates your marriage by 3 generations." Charlotte exhaled slowly. The knot in her chest loosened slightly. "He's going to keep doing this, isn't he?" she asked. "Keep finding new ways to hurt me. Keep attacking from angles I don't expect." "Yes," Bennett said honestly. He never sugarcoated things. Charlotte was learning to appreciate that about him. This is who he is. This is what he does. He will fight dirty because he doesn't know any other way to fight. But here's what you need to understand. He paused. When he spoke again, his voice was harder, more certain. Every aggressive move he makes, every petty retaliation, every attempt to intimidate you, it all becomes evidence. It all shows the court exactly who he is. Let him dig his own grave. Let him show the judge that he's exactly the kind of man who would force his pregnant wife to kneel. We'll be there to push him in. That afternoon, Graham's public relations team released a statement to the press. Charlotte read it on her phone, sitting in her mother's kitchen with a cup of tea going cold in her hands. Harper was there, having taken the afternoon off from the library to keep Charlotte company. Margot was in the next room on the phone with her own attorney. Graham Holt is saddened by his wife's decision to end their marriage. He wishes only the best for her and their unborn child. He hopes to co-parent peacefully in the future and respectfully asks for privacy during this difficult time. Charlotte read it 3 times. Each time she felt sicker. The statement was masterful. It painted Graham as the reasonable one, the mature one, the victim of a wife who had inexplicably decided to destroy their family. It mentioned the unborn child, making sure the public knew that Charlotte was pregnant, positioning Graham as a concerned father-to-be who just wanted peace. It was lies wrapped in velvet, poison served on a silver platter. The comments on the news articles were brutal. Another gold digger trying to steal a rich man's money. She probably cheated on him and is making up stories to cover her tracks. Poor Graham. He seems like such a nice guy. Women like her give all women a bad name. Marry a billionaire and then cry abuse when he doesn't worship you. Harper threw the phone across the room. "Don't read the comments," she said fiercely. "Don't ever read the comments. Those people don't know you. They don't know the truth. They're just noise, Frieden." Charlotte nodded, but the words had already burrowed into her brain. Gold digger, liar, abuser of a nice man. The public had made up its mind before hearing a single fact. She wondered if they would change their minds when they heard the recording. When they heard Graham say, "Get on your knees," when they heard Sienna laugh. She hoped so, but she was no longer certain of anything. The other half of the commenters took her side, but their support was almost worse. Poor Charlotte. She must be so scared. I hope she gets help. Victims need our sympathy. Bless her heart. She seems so fragile. They pitied her, saw her as a victim, a damsel in distress, a helpless woman who needed saving. Charlotte was not helpless. She was not fragile. She was not a victim waiting to be rescued. She was a woman who had been knocked down and was getting back up. A woman who was fighting. a woman who refused to kneel ever again. But no one wanted to see that version of her. They wanted the crying victim or the scheming gold digger, the Madonna or the whore, nothing in between. That night, Harper found Charlotte in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. The counters were covered in flour. The smell of cinnamon and baking apples filled the air. Charlotte was rolling out pie dough, her movements mechanical, precise, practiced from years of making her grandmother's recipe. "What are you doing?" Harper asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Making my grandmother's apple pie." Charlotte's voice was flat, empty. "It's the only thing I can think of that makes sense right now." Harper sat down at the counter. She watched Charlotte work in silence, watched her roll the dough, peel the apples, mix the cinnamon and brown sugar, and just a hint of nutmeg, exactly the way Grandma Eleanor had taught her. "You know you don't have to be strong all the time," Harper said gently. Charlotte's hands stilled on the rolling pin. "Yes, I do," she said finally. Her voice cracked, but she did not cry. "Because if I stop being strong, even for a second, I'm going to fall apart. And I can't fall apart. Not now, not with the baby coming. Not with Graham trying to destroy me. I have to hold it together." She went back to rolling the dough. The kitchen filled with the rhythm of her work, the smell of butter and sugar, the warmth of the oven preheating. "This is what Grandma Eleanor did," Charlotte said softly. "When Grandpa died, when Dad died, when anything bad happened. She baked. She said it was the only time her hands knew what to do, even when her heart didn't." Harper's eyes were wet. "Your grandmother was a wise woman. She was the strongest person I ever knew." Charlotte's voice broke slightly. "I'm trying to be like her. I'm trying to be strong. But sometimes I don't know if I can do this." Harper stood up, crossed to where Charlotte was working, wrapped her arms around her friend from behind. "You can," Harper whispered. "You can do this, and you don't have to do it alone." Charlotte did not eat any of the pie when it came out of the oven, but making it helped, having something to do with her hands, having something she could control when everything else was chaos, having a connection to her grandmother, to her roots, to the women who had come before her and survived things just as hard. She covered the pie and left it on the counter. Maybe her mother would want some in the morning. Maybe not. It did not matter. The making was the point. The next week brought 2 developments. The first was a meeting with a journalist named Vera Morrison. Harper had made the connection. Vera worked for The Atlantic, one of the most respected publications in the country. She was 43 years old with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for taking down powerful men. Her previous targets had included a tech CEO, a university president, and a prominent televangelist. All of them had ended up disgraced. They met in a coffee shop in the West Village. Charlotte wore sunglasses and a hat, feeling ridiculous, like a spy in a bad movie. But Bennett had warned her that Graham probably had people watching, private investigators, security consultants, men who got paid to gather information and look for weaknesses. Vera got straight to the point. "I've been investigating Graham Holt's business practices for 18 months, she said. Her voice was low, intense. "His tax strategies, his treatment of employees, the way he crushes competitors and buries scandals. I know he's dirty, but I couldn't nail him on the financials. His lawyers are too good. Everything is technically legal, even when it's morally reprehensible." "So why are we meeting?" Charlotte asked. "Because this is different." Vera leaned forward. Her eyes were bright with intensity. "The pattern of abuse, the premeditation, the recordings and messages you have. Charlotte, this story is bigger than your divorce. This is about how powerful men weaponize marriage, how they use women as stepping stones and discard them when they're done, how they get away with it because they have money and connections and armies of lawyers and PR firms." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. She stirred her coffee, watching the cream spiral into patterns that dissolved as soon as they formed. "If I go public," she said slowly, "my daughter will grow up with this story attached to her name. Every time someone searches for her, they'll find this. Every college application, every job interview, every first date. They'll find the story of how her father forced her pregnant mother to kneel." "Yes," Vera said. She did not sugarcoat it. Charlotte was grateful for that. "That's true. That's the cost. You have to decide if you're willing to pay it. But if I stay silent, Graham wins. He goes on with his life like nothing happened, and other women might suffer the same thing I did. Other wives, other girlfriends, other women who cross his path and don't see the predator until it's too late. Vera nodded. That's also true. Charlotte thought about Eleanor, about the baby growing inside her, about the kind of world she wanted her daughter to inherit. A world where men like Graham faced no consequences, where they could force pregnant women to kneel and then go on with their lives untouched, where money and power were enough to bury any truth, silence any victim, escape any accountability. Or a world where women fought back, where they told their stories even when it was hard, where they refused to be silent even when powerful forces tried to shut them up. Charlotte made her decision. I'll do the interview, she said, but not until after the baby is born, after I've recovered, after I'm strong enough to handle whatever comes next. Vera nodded. She reached across the table and squeezed Charlotte's hand. You're braver than you know, Vera said. Charlotte was not sure about that. She did not feel brave. She felt terrified. She felt exhausted. She felt like she was barely holding herself together. But she had learned something in the past few weeks, something her grandmother had tried to teach her years ago. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. She finished her coffee, pulled her hat down lower, and walked back out into the cold winter streets of Manhattan. 3 weeks until the baby was due. 3 weeks to get ready for the fight of her life. She was as ready as she would ever be. The water broke at the worst possible moment. Charlotte was at a charity gala, the Hartwell Foundation's annual benefit for children's literacy, held in a glittering ballroom at the Pierre Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, women in designer gowns and men in tuxedos. The kind of event where fortunes were donated and deals were made, and everyone pretended to care about something other than themselves. Charlotte had forced herself to attend for one reason. Graham would be there. She wanted him to see that she was not hiding, that she was not ashamed, that his threats and manipulations and attempts to starve her out had not broken her. She wanted to walk into that ballroom with her head high and let him know that she was not afraid. She had spent 2 hours getting ready. Harper had come over to help. They had chosen an emerald green gown that flowed over Charlotte's 8.5 months pregnant belly like water. It was elegant, sophisticated, the kind of dress that demanded attention without begging for it. Charlotte's hair was pinned up in a complicated arrangement that Harper had learned from a YouTube tutorial. Her makeup was subtle but perfect. She looked beautiful. She knew she looked beautiful, and she wanted Graham to see exactly what he was losing. She spotted him the moment she walked into the ballroom. He was standing near the bar, a glass of scotch in his hand. Sienna was beside him, wearing a red dress that was cut too low and too tight for a charity event. They were laughing at something. Sienna's hand was on Graham's arm, possessive, triumphant, marking her territory in front of 700 of Manhattan's most influential people. Charlotte felt her stomach clench, but she kept her head high, kept her smile in place, walked through the crowd, accepting compliments from well-meaning socialites who had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. Charlotte, you look radiant. Pregnancy agrees with you, darling. When's the baby due? You must be so excited. Charlotte smiled, nodded, made small talk, pretended that her life was not falling apart, pretended that she was not planning to destroy the man across the room. And then she felt it, a warm rush between her legs, a sudden wetness soaking through her gown, a tightening in her abdomen that was different from the Braxton Hicks contractions she had been feeling for weeks. No, not now, not here, not in front of everyone. But the baby had other plans. Charlotte gripped the edge of the bar, her vision swam, colors blurred together. The chandelier lights became stars, spinning and wheeling overhead. A woman next to her gasped, "Oh my God, is that your water?" Charlotte looked down. The emerald gown was darkening around her thighs. A puddle was forming on the marble floor. Her water had broken. In the middle of the Pierre Hotel, in front of 700 guests, in front of Graham and Sienna and everyone she had ever known. "Someone call an ambulance," she heard herself say. Her voice was remarkably calm, as if it belonged to someone else. The baby's coming. What happened next was chaos. People rushing, phones appearing, Camera flashes going off as photographers captured the scene for the society pages and gossip blogs. Women in gowns stepping back to avoid the spreading puddle. Men in tuxedos looking uncomfortable, unsure what to do with this biological reality intruding on their elegant evening. And through it all, Charlotte caught one glimpse of Graham's face. He looked horrified, not concerned for her or the baby, not worried about whether she was okay, just horrified that his private drama was now playing out in public, that his carefully constructed image was being splashed with the messy reality of his pregnant wife going into labor while his mistress stood beside him. Sienna's face was frozen in something between shock and satisfaction, like she was glad this was happening, like she wanted Charlotte to suffer, like she thought this public humiliation was just desserts. Charlotte filed those expressions away. She would remember them later, but right now she had more important things to focus on. The ambulance arrived in minutes. Charlotte was loaded onto a stretcher, her emerald gown ruined, her careful makeup smeared with sweat. The paramedics were kind, professional, asking her questions about contractions and timing and how far along she was. She answered as best she could, but part of her mind was elsewhere, thinking about the photos that were already spreading across social media. Charlotte Weston, in her emerald gown, being rushed to the hospital. Graham and Sienna frozen in the background, the story writing itself. The tabloids would have a field day, and for once, Charlotte did not care. The labor was 17 hours. 17 hours of pain and pressure, and the feeling that her body was being torn apart from the inside. 17 hours of gripping her mother's hand until her knuckles went white. 17 hours of Harper coaching her through breathing exercises and wiping her forehead with cool cloths and telling her she was doing amazing. She was so strong, she was almost there. Graham showed up at the hospital around hour 8. Charlotte heard about it later. From the security guard Bennett had arranged to be stationed outside her room. Apparently, Graham had stormed into the maternity ward like he owned the place, which in a sense he did. The Holt family had donated the wing's newest equipment 5 years ago. There was a plaque with their name on it in the lobby. "She's my wife," Graham had shouted at the nurses. "That's my child. I have every right to be in that delivery room." The security guard, a former Marine named Marcus, had been unmoved. "Sir, Mrs. Weston has specifically requested no visitors. You're not on the approved list." "Do you know who I am? I'll have your job for this. I'll have this whole hospital shut down. Sir." Marcus's voice had been calm, pleasant even. "You are welcome to try, but right now you need to leave this floor. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll call the police, and then the tabloids will have an even better story than the one they're already writing." Graham had left. Apparently his face had been purple with rage. Charlotte wished she could have seen it, but she had more important things to focus on. At 4:27 in the morning, after 17 hours of labor, Eleanor Charlotte Weston was born. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair, 10 perfect fingers, 10 perfect toes, a rosebud mouth and eyes that would probably be blue, like Charlotte's, like Margot's, like all the Ellsworth women going back generations. Dr. Patricia Brennan placed the baby on Charlotte's chest. The weight was impossibly small, impossibly precious, impossibly perfect. "She's beautiful," Dr. Brennan said softly. "You did beautifully, Charlotte. You were so strong." Charlotte looked down at her daughter, at this tiny person who had been growing inside her for 9 months. This little girl who had kicked and squirmed and hiccuped through everything. Through the discovery of the affair, through the kneeling, through the lawyers and the frozen accounts and the public humiliation. Eleanor had been there for all of it, growing, becoming, waiting, and now she was here. "Eleanor," Charlotte whispered, "after my grandmother, Ellie for short." The baby opened her eyes. They were that deep, dark blue that all newborns have, the color that would eventually settle into something more permanent. But Charlotte could already see something in them. Something fierce, something stubborn, something that would not be pushed around or put down or forced to kneel. "You will know your worth from your first breath," Charlotte whispered to her daughter. Tears were streaming down her face now, the first tears she had cried since the night of the kneeling. "No man will ever make you feel small. No one will ever make you apologize for who you are. I swear it, Eleanor. I swear it." The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like an agreement. Charlotte held her daughter close, breathed in that new baby smell, and felt something she had not felt in months. Complete. The nurse came in a few hours later with paperwork. Charlotte had slept a little. Eleanor nestled in a bassinet beside her bed. Harper was dozing in the chair by the window. Margot had gone home to shower and change, promising to return with real food instead of hospital fare. "We need to fill out the birth certificate," the nurse said gently. "I'm sorry to bother you, but there are some time-sensitive forms." Charlotte took the clipboard, looked at the form, name of child, date of birth, time of birth, name of mother, and then name of father. Charlotte stared at the blank line, the place where Graham Holt's name should go, where legally it probably had to go. He was her husband, the biological father of her child, no matter what he had done. She thought about everything, the affair, the messages, the way he had planned to use her from the very beginning, the kneeling, the humiliation, the frozen accounts in the public smear campaign, and the way he had shown up at the hospital demanding access like Eleanor was property he had purchased. Her pen hovered over the paper. Then firmly, clearly, without hesitation, she wrote one word: unknown. It was petty. She knew it was petty. Bennett would probably tell her it was a mistake, that it would complicate the custody proceedings, that Graham's lawyers would use it against her. But it was also the truth, in every way that mattered. Graham had never been a real father. He had never wanted to be. He did not want a daughter. He wanted an heir, a legacy, a name to carry on the Holt dynasty. He wanted a line item on his estate planning documents, not a person to love and raise and nurture. Eleanor deserved better than that. She deserved a father who wanted her, or no father at all. Charlotte handed the form back to the nurse. The nurse looked at it, raised her eyebrows, but she did not say anything, just nodded and left. The birth certificate was filed the next day. A copy was sent to Graham's lawyers as part of the routine custody proceedings that had already begun. His reaction, according to Bennett, was nuclear. "He's demanding a paternity test," Bennett said over the phone. Charlotte was still in the hospital, Eleanor sleeping peacefully in her arms. "He's threatening to sue for defamation, for parental alienation, for emotional distress." The usual bluster from a man who's not used to being told no. Charlotte looked down at her daughter, at Eleanor's tiny fingers curled around nothing, at her peaceful face, so new to the world, so unaware of the storm swirling around her. "Let him sue," Charlotte said. Her voice was calm, certain. "Let him demand whatever he wants. Let him throw every legal maneuver in the book at us. I'm not afraid of him anymore." And she meant it. Looking at Eleanor, Charlotte understood something she had not understood before. She was not alone. She would never be alone again. She had this tiny person who depended on her, who trusted her, who needed her to be strong. She had her mother who had been preparing for this moment for years. She had Harper, who had dropped everything to be by her side. She had Bennett, who had never lost a case and was not about to start now. Graham had money. He had power. He had connections. But Charlotte had something better. She had the truth. She had love. She had a daughter to fight for. And she was just getting started. 6 weeks after Eleanor was born, Charlotte received an unexpected phone call. She was sitting in her mother's sunroom, nursing the baby while winter sunlight streamed through the windows. Eleanor was getting bigger every day, more alert, more aware. She had started to smile, real smiles that crinkled up her whole face and made Charlotte's heart ache with love. The caller ID showed a number she did not recognize. Normally, she would have let it go to voicemail. But something made her answer. "Mrs. Weston, this is Deacon Holt." Charlotte nearly dropped the phone. Deacon Holt, Graham's father, the patriarch of the Holt Empire. The man who had built a fortune from nothing and raised a monster for a son. The man Charlotte had met exactly 4 times. At the engagement party, at the wedding, at 2 mandatory holiday dinners where he had looked at her like she was a piece of furniture that had been purchased for the house. "Mr. Holt," she said carefully, "I'm surprised to hear from you." "I imagine you are." His voice was old, tired, but there was steel beneath the weariness. The same steel that had built skyscrapers and bankrupted competitors and made the Holt name synonymous with ruthless success. "I'd like to meet with you. Privately." There's something you need to know. Charlotte's mind raced. This had to be a trap. Deacon was working with Graham. This was just another manipulation, another attempt to get to her through unexpected channels. Why should I trust you? She asked. You shouldn't. There was something almost like respect in his voice. You shouldn't trust anyone connected to my son, but what I have to say might help you. And right now, I think you need all the help you can get. Charlotte thought about it. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that she should hang up, that she should tell Bennett and let the lawyers handle it. But something in Deacon's voice made her hesitate. Something that sounded almost like regret, almost like grief, almost like a man who had finally looked in the mirror and did not like what he saw. Where? She asked finally. There's a diner in Queens, Margie's on Roosevelt Avenue. It's been there since 1953. No one there will recognize either of us. Thursday at 2? I'll be there. 2 days later, Charlotte walked into Margie's diner. It was exactly what she had expected. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, formica counters worn smooth by decades of elbows, a jukebox in the corner playing oldies, the smell of coffee and bacon and something vaguely sweet, maybe pie. Deacon Holt was already there, sitting in a booth near the back. He looked smaller than Charlotte remembered, older. He moved slowly with a cane and his hands trembled slightly around his coffee cup. But his eyes were the same, sharp, blue, the same shade as Graham's, the same cold intensity. Looking at him was like looking at what Graham would become in 30 years, if Graham lived that long, if karma did not catch up with him first. Charlotte slid into the booth across from him. A waitress appeared, poured coffee without being asked, and disappeared again. Thank you for coming, Deacon said. Thank you for calling. Charlotte did not smile, did not soften. Now tell me why I'm here. Deacon was quiet for a moment. He wrapped his spotted, trembling hands around his coffee cup, as if drawing warmth from it. He looked out the window at the Queen Street, at the ordinary people living ordinary lives, at a world so far from the penthouses and boardrooms where he had spent his existence. My son has disgraced this family, he said finally. I've known for years, decades probably. The affairs, the settlements, the women who left suddenly and would never speak of why, the patterns that anyone with eyes could see if they chose to look. Charlotte felt cold. How many women? I stopped counting after 12. Deacon's voice was flat, matter of fact, as if he were discussing quarterly earnings rather than victims. I told myself it wasn't my concern, that Graham's personal life was his own business, that as long as the company thrived, as long as the Holt name retained its prestige, the rest didn't matter. And now? Now I've seen the recording. Deacon looked up, met Charlotte's eyes. For the first time, she saw something human in those cold blue depths, something that looked almost like shame. Now I've watched my son force a pregnant woman to her knees. Now I've heard him say apologize in that voice, the same voice I taught him to use in negotiations, in hostile takeovers, in crushing competitors. He paused, his jaw tightened, and I realized that I taught him everything he knows about how to treat people. I taught him that power was everything, that money solved every problem, that rules were for other people, that empathy was weakness. Charlotte stared at the old man. The anger she expected did not come, just exhaustion and a strange, bitter understanding. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Deacon reached into his jacket, pulled out a flash drive, small, black, innocuous. He slid it across the table. 40 years of files, he said. Every woman Graham has mistreated, every settlement, every non-disclosure agreement, names, dates, amounts, documentation of patterns that his lawyers have spent decades burying. Charlotte picked up the drive. It weighed almost nothing, but she understood what it represented. Evidence, proof, the ammunition she needed to destroy Graham Holt. This could ruin him, she said. Yes. Why would you do that to your own son? Deacon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough, broken. Because I failed him, he said. I raised him to believe that power was everything, that money could buy anything, that the rules didn't apply to people like us. I created the monster. He paused, swallowed hard. The least I can do is help stop him. Charlotte studied the old man's face, looking for the lie, for the angle, for the trap she still half expected. She found only exhaustion, and something that might have been grief, and something else beneath it all that might have been the last desperate hope of a dying man trying to make something right before he met his maker. There's something else, Deacon said. I'm prepared to testify. In court, under oath. I'll tell them everything I know about my son, every pattern, every victim, every cover-up that I looked away from because it was convenient. Charlotte felt something shift inside her. This was it. This was the peace she needed. Graham could dismiss her as a scorned wife seeking revenge. He could claim she was lying, exaggerating, making up stories to get more money in the divorce. But his own father, testifying against him, confirming everything Charlotte had said and more, that was different. That was proof that could not be explained away. Why should I believe you won't change your mind? Charlotte asked. Won't suddenly remember your family loyalty when it matters? Won't have your lawyers claim you were confused, that you didn't mean it, that your estranged daughter-in-law manipulated you? Deacon smiled. It was a many tired smile, the smile of a man who had nothing left to lose. Because I'm dying, he said simply. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months, maybe less. The doctors say it's inoperable. Charlotte did not know what to say, so she said nothing. I'll be damned if I meet my maker without trying to make at least some of this right, Deacon continued. I can't undo what Graham has done. I can't bring back the years those women lost, the trust they lost, the pieces of themselves that my son took from them. But I can tell the truth. Finally, before it's too late. They sat in silence for a while. The jukebox played a song about lost love. The coffee grew cold. The afternoon light faded toward evening. Finally, Charlotte spoke. Thank you, she said. For what it's worth, I believe you. Deacon nodded slowly. Take care of that little girl. Give her a better world than the one I made. I intend to. Charlotte left the diner with the flash drive in her pocket. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from hope. From the knowledge that the tide was finally turning, from the understanding that Graham Holt's carefully constructed empire was about to come crashing down around him. That night, alone in her mother's guest room, Charlotte finally broke. Eleanor was sleeping peacefully in the nursery down the hall. The baby monitor was on the nightstand, transmitting soft breathing sounds. The house was quiet. Margot had gone to bed. Even the city outside seemed muted, distant, wrapped in winter silence. And the weight of everything finally caught up with Charlotte. She sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed she had slept in as a teenager, the same floral wallpaper, the same view of the garden where she had played as a child, where her father had pushed her on the swing, where she had dreamed of the life she would have when she grew up. She had dreamed of love, of happiness, of a partner who would cherish her the way her father had cherished her mother. She had never dreamed of this. The tears came. Finally, after weeks of holding them back, of being strong, of refusing to let Graham see her break, she cried for the marriage she thought she had, for the husband she thought she knew, for the future she had imagined, the family she had planned, the life she had believed was possible. She cried for Eleanor, who would grow up without a father, or worse, with a father who saw her as property. She cried for the naive young woman who had walked down that aisle 4 years ago, so full of hope, so certain that love conquered all. She cried until she was empty, until she was hollow, until there were no tears left. Then she got up, she walked to the bathroom, drew a bath, hot, almost too hot, filling the room with steam. She sank into the water, let it cover her up to her chin, let the heat seep into her bones. She did not check her phone, did not think about Graham or the lawsuit or the testimony or the trial. She just floated, in silence, in warmth, in nothing. Her body was still healing from the birth, still sore in places, still not quite her own, but it was getting better. Day by day, week by week, she was getting stronger. She stayed in the bath until the water went cold, then she got out, dried off, put on her grandmother's old robe, the one Margot had saved all these years, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender and rose. She caught herself doing something she had done 1,000 times before, rehearsing conversations with Graham in her head, explaining her actions, defending her choices, justifying her existence. She stopped. "I don't owe him explanations," she said out loud. The words echoed off the bathroom tiles. "I never did. I don't have to justify myself to him. I don't have to make him understand. I just have to survive. And then I have to win." Her phone buzzed on the nightstand in the bedroom. She almost ignored it, but something made her check. It was Bennett. Good news. Judge assigned to the case is Ruth Pemberton. They call her the Equalizer. Charlotte stared at the message. She knew that name. Everyone in legal circles knew that name. Ruth Pemberton was a legend, a federal judge who had presided over some of the most high-profile cases of the past 2 decades. She was famous for holding powerful men accountable, for seeing through expensive lawyers and fancy legal arguments, for delivering justice when no one else would. She had sent CEOs to prison. She had bankrupted corporations that thought they were untouchable. She had given voice to victims who had been silenced for years. And now she was going to preside over Charlotte's case. Charlotte smiled. For the first time in weeks, it reached her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, things were finally turning in her favor. The trial began on a Tuesday in January. The day was cold and gray, the kind of winter morning that made you want to stay in bed under warm blankets. But Charlotte had been awake since 5, unable to sleep, running through her testimony in her head for the 100th time. She arrived at the federal courthouse through a side entrance. Bennett had arranged it specifically to avoid the media circus at the front, where dozens of news vans were parked and reporters stood in the cold, waiting for any scrap of information. But even the side entrance had its share of cameras. Photographers shouting her name, microphones thrust toward her face, voices calling out questions. "Charlotte, Charlotte, how do you feel about facing your husband in court? Is it true Graham's father is going to testify against him? What do you want to say to women in similar situations?" Charlotte kept her head down, kept walking. Let the security guards clear a path, one foot in front of the other. That was all she had to do. The courtroom was smaller than she expected. Wood-paneled walls, dark with age and gravity. Harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. Rows of wooden benches that were already filling with spectators, journalists, and curious onlookers who had stood in line for hours for a chance to watch the drama unfold. Graham was already there. He sat at the defendant's table, flanked by 3 lawyers in matching charcoal suits. They looked like they had stepped out of a legal thriller, all sharp cheekbones and expensive haircuts and leather briefcases. Graham himself was wearing a navy suit, a white shirt, a red tie, the uniform of power, the costume of a man who expected to win. He looked confident, relaxed, like this was just another negotiation, just another deal to close, just another obstacle to bulldoze on his way to getting what he wanted. He caught Charlotte's eye as she walked to her own table, smiled, that cold, empty smile that used to make her heart flutter with what she thought was love. Now she understood it for what it was. The smile of a predator who was absolutely certain of his prey. Bennett touched her elbow. "Don't look at him, don't react, don't give him the satisfaction." Charlotte nodded, took her seat at the plaintiff's table, arranged her papers, kept her eyes forward. The bailiff announced the judge's arrival. Everyone rose. Ruth Pemberton entered the courtroom. She was 61 years old with steel gray hair, cut short and practical, and a face that gave absolutely nothing away. She wore the traditional black robes of her office, but somehow they looked different on her. Not ceremonial, functional. The uniform of someone who took her job very seriously. She moved with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to announce itself, the kind that filled a room simply by existing. Charlotte had seen generals and senators and CEOs who commanded less presence than this woman in her plain black robes. "Be seated," Judge Pemberton said. Her voice was clear, firm, brooking no argument. "This court is now in session. Case number 24372, Weston versus Holt." The first day was procedural, opening statements from both sides, motions and counter-motions, legal arguments that made Charlotte's head spin with their complexity. Bennett's opening was measured, professional, laying out the facts without embellishment. The affair, the premeditation, the abuse, the recording. He spoke for 45 minutes and never once raised his voice. Graham's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Harrison Pike, took a different approach. He painted Graham as a devoted husband who had made mistakes, yes, but mistakes born of stress and overwork and the pressures of running a billion-dollar company. He suggested that Charlotte was exaggerating, manipulating, playing the victim for financial gain. Charlotte sat very still while Pike spoke. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside she was burning with rage. Exaggerating? Playing the victim? She had a recording of her husband forcing her to her knees. She had messages proving he had planned to discard her from the beginning. She had 40 years of documented abuse of other women. Let them call that exaggeration. Let them try The trial stretched over 6 days. 6 days of testimony, of evidence presented and cross-examined, of witnesses called to the stand and questioned and redirected. 6 days of Graham's lawyers trying every trick in the book to discredit Charlotte, to paint her as unstable, vindictive, unfit. Charlotte's testimony came on day 3. She sat in the witness chair for 4 hours. Bennett guided her through the questions, helping her tell her story in a calm, methodical way. The courtship, the wedding, the early years of marriage that had seemed so perfect, the signs she had missed or explained away or refused to see, and then the night of the kneeling. Charlotte described it all. Every detail, every word that had been spoken, every emotion she had felt. She spoke quietly without drama, letting the facts speak for themselves. She did not cry. She had done her crying. Now she was here to tell the truth. And then Bennett played the recording. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Even the journalists stopped scribbling in their notebooks. Even Graham's lawyers stopped their whispered consultations. Get on your knees. Graham's voice filled the room, cold, commanding, cruel. The voice of a man who expected to be obeyed. The voice of a man who had never been told no in his entire privileged life. Charlotte watched the faces around her, the spectators, the journalists, the lawyers, even Judge Pemberton, whose professional mask slipped for just a moment. She saw shock, horror, disgust, recognition. And on Graham's face, for just a moment before he composed himself, before he rebuilt his mask of confidence and control, she saw something else. Fear. He was afraid. Not of losing money or reputation or social standing. He was afraid of being seen for what he really was, of having his mask ripped away in front of the world, of being exposed as the monster he had always been underneath his custom suits and charitable donations. Good. Let him be afraid. Let him understand what Charlotte had felt that night, on her knees, with his fingers bruising her arm and his voice commanding her to apologize for recognizing his betrayal. The recording ended. Charlotte's broken voice saying, "I apologize for accusing you of lying," faded into silence. Judge Pemberton spoke. Her voice was carefully neutral, but there was something underneath it, something that sounded almost like controlled fury. The court will take a 15-minute recess. Charlotte stepped down from the witness stand. Her legs were shaking, but she kept her back straight, her head high, one foot in front of the other. She passed Graham's table on her way out of the courtroom. He leaned toward her, his voice a whisper that only she could hear. "You'll regret this. I'll destroy you." Charlotte stopped, looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since their wedding day. This man she had loved, this man she had trusted, this man who had given her Eleanor but had never loved either of them. "No," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, certain. "I don't think I will." She walked out of the courtroom, pushed through the heavy doors into the hallway, found an empty bench near a window that looked out over downtown Manhattan. And she sat, just sat, breathing, existing, surviving. A woman sat down beside her. Charlotte didn't recognize her. She was in her late 50s or early 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her coat was practical, not fashionable. She looked like someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone ordinary. "You don't know me," the woman said. "And you don't need to know me, but I wanted to say something to you." Charlotte turned to look at her. I was married to a man like that for 31 years. The woman's voice was steady, but there was pain beneath it. Old pain, but still present. I never had your courage. I never fought back. I just survived. Day after day, year after year, I just survived. Until one day I looked up and realized I'd given him my whole life. She reached over, took Charlotte's hand, squeezed it gently. What you're doing matters, she said. Not just for you, not just for your daughter, for all of us. For every woman who was too scared to fight, for every woman who's still trapped, for every woman who will come after you and remember that someone once stood up and said no. She squeezed Charlotte's hand one more time. Then she stood up, nodded once, and walked away. Charlotte never learned her name, never saw her again, but she would remember that moment for the rest of her life. That stranger on the bench, that brief human connection, that reminder that her fight was bigger than herself. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and went back into the courtroom. There was still work to do. The turning point came on day 5. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls, pressed together like sardines. Outside, the crowd had grown so large that police had been called to manage it. Inside, the tension was so thick you could taste it. Bennett rose from his chair. His voice was calm but carried clearly through the silent room. The plaintiff calls Deacon Holt to the stand. A murmur rippled through the courtroom like a wave. Charlotte heard gasps, whispers, the furious scratching of pens as journalists tried to capture this moment. She watched Graham's face. She watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his jaw clench, watched his hands grip the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. Watched all that cultivated confidence crumble into something that looked almost like panic. He had not known, his own lawyers had not known. Bennett had kept this card close to his chest, waiting for exactly the right moment to play it. And now Graham was watching his own father, the patriarch of the Holt Empire, the man who had built everything Graham had inherited, walk slowly to the witness stand. Deacon moved with difficulty. His cane tapped against the floor with each step. He was thinner than he had been at the diner, paler, the cancer visibly advancing. But his eyes were the same, sharp, blue, alive. He was sworn in, took his seat, looked out at the courtroom, at the cameras, at the journalists who would carry his words to millions of people. And then he looked at his son. Graham looked back, father and son, separated by 20 feet of courtroom and a lifetime of unspoken truths. Graham's expression was a mixture of rage and betrayal, and something that might have been grief, might have been hatred, might have been both. Bennett began, "Mr. Holt, can you state your relationship to the defendant?" "He's my son." Deacon's voice was weaker than it had been at the diner, but still clear, still carrying the authority of 7 decades of commanding rooms. "I raised him. I taught him everything he knows about business, about power, about life." "And what did you teach him?" Deacon was quiet for a moment. The silence stretched. Everyone in the courtroom held their breath. "I taught him that power was everything," Deacon said finally, "that money could solve any problem, that rules were for other people, that empathy was weakness." He paused. "I was wrong about all of it. Can you describe your son's behavioral patterns toward women throughout his adult life?" Graham's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! Relevance! This is character assassination." "Goes to pattern of behavior, Your Honor," Bennett said calmly. "The plaintiff has alleged systematic abuse. The witness has direct knowledge of a documented pattern stretching back decades." Judge Pemberton considered. Her eyes moved from Bennett to Deacon to Graham. Something flickered in her expression. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. "I'll allow it. The witness may answer." Deacon took a breath. When he spoke, his voice was heavy, the voice of a man confessing sins he had carried for a lifetime. "My son views women as assets, acquisitions, things to be used and discarded when they are no longer useful." He paused. "I have documentation of at least 14 women who were mistreated by him over the past 20 years. Settlements, non-disclosure agreements, sudden resignations, patterns that anyone with eyes could see if they chose to look." "And you chose not to look?" "I chose to look away." Deacon's voice cracked. "It was easier, more convenient, better for business. I told myself it wasn't my concern, that Graham's personal life was his own affair. He laughed bitterly. Affairs, that's a good word for it. And Charlotte Weston, was she an acquisition? I believe so. Deacon looked at Charlotte for the first time since taking the stand. His eyes were wet. The Weston name carried prestige that even Holt money couldn't buy. Her father was a respected judge. Her mother comes from one of the oldest families in New York. Graham saw an opportunity. His voice hardened, and he took it, the way he takes everything, without regard for who gets hurt, without empathy, without conscience. Do you believe your son ever loved Ms. Weston? Graham's lawyer objected again. This time the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The question hung in the air, unanswered but understood. Bennett pressed forward. Mr. Holt, why are you testifying today? Why would you speak against your own son in a public courtroom? Deacon was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Charlotte, then at the baby carrier beside her, where Eleanor was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the history being made around her. Then at his son, his only child, the heir to everything he had built. Because I helped create him, Deacon said finally. I raised him without empathy, without conscience, without the understanding that other people matter, that rules apply to everyone, that money cannot buy everything. His voice broke. I created the monster, and now I have to help stop him. He turned to look directly at Graham, father to son, pain to pain, love to hatred. I failed you, Graham. I raised you wrong. I taught you that people were things, that cruelty was strength, that rules didn't apply to men like us. Deacon's voice was barely above a whisper now, but it carried to every corner of the silent courtroom. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I made you. I'm sorry for every woman you've hurt because I taught you that women don't matter. But sorry isn't enough. The only thing I can do now is tell the truth and hope somewhere, somehow, it stops you from hurting anyone else. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a single sound. Then Graham stood up. His face was twisted with rage. His voice was a snarl. This is ridiculous. He's not even my father anymore. He's a sick old man who's been manipulated by Mr. Holt. Judge Pemberton's voice was ice. You will sit down and remain silent, or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Is that understood? Graham stood there for a moment, vibrating with fury. Then his lawyers pulled him back down, whispered urgently in his ear. He sat, but his eyes never left his father's face. Deacon looked back at him with something that might have been sadness, might have been pity, might have been goodbye. That afternoon, Sienna Cross took the stand. She looked different from the woman Charlotte remembered from that night in the pen. Smaller somehow, more fragile. The confidence that had seemed so unshakable was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like fear. She was wearing a simple gray dress, no designer labels, no expensive jewelry. She looked like someone is trying very hard to be invisible. Bennett's questions were gentle but relentless. Ms. Cross, how long was your affair with Graham Holt? 2 years. Sienna's voice was barely above a whisper. Since about 6 months before his wedding. Did he promise to leave his wife for you? Sienna hesitated, looked at Graham, then looked away, as if she couldn't bear to see his face. Yes, he said he just needed an heir first, that after the baby was born, he would divorce Charlotte and marry me. Were you present on the night Graham forced Charlotte to kneel? The silence stretched. Sienna's hands were shaking. Yes. Can you describe what happened? He made her apologize, to me, on her knees. Sienna's voice broke. In the foyer of their penthouse. She was 8 months pregnant. She could barely get down. But he made her do it anyway. And what did you do? The question hung in the air. Sienna's face crumpled. I laughed, she whispered. The word fell into the courtroom like a stone into still water. Ripples of disgust spreading outward. I laughed, Sienna repeated, louder now as if confessing to a crime. I thought I was winning. I thought it meant he loved me more than her. I thought I was better than her. Do you still believe that? Sienna shook her head. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her makeup, stripping away the mask she had worn for so long. "He never loved me," she said. "He never loved anyone. I was just useful. A tool. A weapon to use against his wife. The same way Charlotte was useful. The same way everyone is useful to Graham until they're not." She looked at Charlotte. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time. "I'm sorry, I know that doesn't help. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I'm sorry for all of it." Charlotte felt something shift inside her. She had hated Sienna for so long, had imagined confronting her 1,000 times, screaming at her, making her feel the same pain Charlotte had felt. But sitting here watching Sienna break down on the witness stand, Charlotte felt something unexpected. Pity. Sienna had been manipulated too. Not the same way, not to the same degree, but manipulated nonetheless. Used and discarded like everyone else in Graham's orbit. Graham had done this to both of them, turned them against each other, made them fight over scraps of his attention while he laughed behind their backs, made them hate each other so they would not notice that the real enemy was him. Charlotte did not forgive Sienna. She was not sure she ever could, but she stopped hating her because hatred was heavy, and Charlotte was tired of carrying weight that did not belong to her. She met Sienna's eyes across the courtroom, nodded once, just an acknowledgement, human to human, survivor to survivor. Then she looked away. The prosecution rested that afternoon. Tomorrow the judge would deliver her ruling. Tomorrow everything would change. The courtroom was packed beyond any measure of capacity. People lined the hallways, watching on screens that had been hastily set up for the overflow crowd. Outside the courthouse, news vans stretched for blocks in every direction. Protesters gathered on both sides of the debate, their signs and chants creating a constant background noise that could be heard even through the thick stone walls. Inside, Charlotte sat at the plaintiff's table. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her face was calm, composed, giving nothing away. But her heart was racing so fast she could feel it in her throat. This was it. After months of fighting, after everything she had endured, the kneeling, the humiliation, the frozen accounts, the public smear campaign, the testimony, the evidence, all of it had led to this moment. Eleanor was with Margot in a secure room elsewhere in the courthouse, watched over by Marcus, the security guard. Charlotte had wanted her daughter close today, even though Eleanor was too young to understand what was happening. Somehow, knowing Eleanor was nearby made Charlotte feel stronger. Ruth Pemberton entered the courtroom. Everyone rose. The judge looked the same as she had throughout the trial, composed, unreadable, utterly in command of the room without seeming to try. She arranged her papers, looked out at the packed gallery, let the silence build until it was almost unbearable. Then she spoke. "This court has heard extensive testimony over the past 6 days. We have reviewed recordings, documents, and witness statements. We have considered arguments from both the plaintiff and the defense. We have listened to testimony from family members, former partners, and expert witnesses." She paused. The silence was absolute. "The facts of this case are extraordinary. They are also, unfortunately, not unique." Ruth Pemberton looked at Graham. Her gaze was level, measuring, giving nothing away. The defendant, Graham Holt, carried on an affair with Sienna Cross for approximately 2 years, beginning before his marriage to Charlotte Weston. He concealed this affair through systematic deception. He married Ms. Weston with the explicit intention, documented in his own text messages, of producing an heir and then discarding her. She let those words sink in. Most significantly, on the night of November 14th, Graham Holt forced his 8 months pregnant wife to kneel on a marble floor before his mistress and apologize for recognizing his infidelity. He did this not in a moment of passion, not in the heat of an argument, but deliberately, calculatedly, as an act of humiliation and control designed to break her spirit and ensure her compliance. Judge Pemberton turned to look at Charlotte. Ms. Weston showed remarkable courage in documenting this abuse and bringing it to light. The recording she made that night is among the most disturbing pieces of evidence this court has ever admitted. Then she turned back to Graham. This court has witnessed a pattern of psychological manipulation, coercive control, and calculated cruelty that stretches back decades. Mr. Holt did not merely betray his wife, he systematically dismantled her dignity. He used her body, specifically her pregnancy, as a tool of control. He planned, with cold deliberation, to discard her once she had served her reproductive purpose. Graham's lawyers were scribbling furiously. Graham himself sat rigid, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Therefore, Judge Pemberton continued, this court orders the following. She read from her notes, each word precise, each sentence a nail in Graham Holt's coffin. Full custody of Eleanor Charlotte Weston is awarded to the mother. The defendant will have supervised visitation rights only, contingent upon the plaintiff's written approval and a comprehensive psychological evaluation. Charlotte exhaled. The first victory. 70% of marital assets are awarded to the plaintiff. This includes the Manhattan penthouse, all properties acquired during the marriage, the entirety of the plaintiff's prenuptial settlement, and a substantial portion of liquid assets currently held in joint accounts. Graham's lawyer started to rise. Judge Pemberton silenced him with a look. The defendant is further ordered to issue a public apology. This apology will be televised during primetime programming on a date to be determined by this court. In this apology, the defendant will acknowledge his abuse, accept full responsibility for his actions, and apologize specifically to his wife for the events of November 14th. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Public apology, televised, primetime, Graham Holt forced to admit his crimes in front of the entire country. But Judge Pemberton was not finished. There is one additional matter. Her voice dropped slightly, became more personal. One that this court has deliberated on extensively. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Mr. Holt, please stand. Graham rose slowly. His lawyers whispered urgently to him, but he brushed them off. He stood facing the judge, his shoulders squared, trying to project confidence that Charlotte could tell he no longer felt. In this courtroom, Judge Pemberton said, we have heard testimony about a specific act of cruelty. On the night of November 14th, you forced your pregnant wife to kneel on a marble floor and apologize for recognizing your betrayal. You did this in front of your mistress, who laughed as it happened. She paused, let the words hang in the air. This court cannot undo that act. It cannot erase the humiliation, the pain, the lasting trauma. It cannot give Miss Weston back the pieces of herself that were broken that night. Another pause. But it can create symmetry. It can ensure that you understand, viscerally and publicly, what you did to another human being. Graham's face was changing. The mask was cracking. Something like panic was bleeding through. Mr. Holt, Judge Pemberton said, her voice ringing through the courtroom, you will kneel. The courtroom erupted. Graham's lawyers shot to their feet, shouting objections, citing precedent, screaming about judicial overreach and cruel and unusual punishment in violations of constitutional rights. Judge Pemberton waited. Let the chaos wash over her. Let the lawyers exhaust themselves with their protests. Then she raised one hand. Silence fell like a blade. This is not punishment, she said calmly. This is perspective. You will kneel before this court and apologize, not to your wife, who deserves better than your hollow words could ever provide, but to every woman who has ever been degraded by a man who believed his money and power made him untouchable, to every victim who was silenced, to every survivor who was told she would not be believed. Graham stood frozen. His face was ashen. His whole body was trembling. Kneel, Mr. Holt, or face contempt charges and 60 days in county jail. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 5, on 10. Charlotte watched. The whole courtroom watched. Millions of people around the world, watching on live streams, held their breath. Graham Holt, billionaire, titan of industry, the man who had forced his pregnant wife to her knees, and then slowly his knees began to bend. It was not graceful. It was not dignified. It was the movement of a man who had never had to bow to anyone in his life, forced to do so for the first time. Down he went, down, 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 until his knees touched the cold floor, until he was kneeling in the well of the courtroom, in front of the cameras, in front of the journalists, in front of 12 million people watching on live streams around the world. Now apologize, Judge Pemberton said. Graham's voice was barely audible, rough, broken. I apologize. Louder, let everyone hear you. I apologize. His face was twisted with humiliation, with rage, with the sudden visceral understanding that his power meant nothing here, that all his money and connections and carefully cultivated image could not save him from this moment. Charlotte watched. She had imagined this moment so many times since that night in November, had fantasized about the satisfaction she would feel, the vindication, the triumph of seeing him brought low. But sitting here watching Graham kneel on the courtroom floor, she felt something different. Not satisfaction, not triumph, not even vindication. Peace, it was over. Finally, truly, completely over. He could not hurt her anymore. He could not control her anymore. He could not make her feel small or worthless or invisible anymore. She was free. Ruth Pemberton nodded. "You may rise, Mr. Holt." Graham stood. His legs were visibly shaking. He would not meet anyone's eyes. For the first time in his life, he looked like what he was, a small, broken man whose empire of lies had finally collapsed around him. "This court is adjourned," the judge said. Mr. Weston, I wish you and your daughter every happiness. You have shown remarkable courage throughout these proceedings. May your future be as bright as your past was dark." Charlotte stood. "Thank you, Your Honor." She walked out of the courtroom, past Graham, who would not look at her, past the cameras and microphones, past the shouting reporters and flashing bulbs, through the heavy doors and into the hallway beyond. Harper was waiting. Margot was there with Eleanor in her arms. The baby was awake, her bright blue eyes taking in all the commotion with infant curiosity. Charlotte took her daughter, held her close, breathed in that sweet, perfect baby smell. "It's over, baby girl," she whispered. "It's finally over. We won." Eleanor cooed. Her tiny hand reached up to touch Charlotte's face. Her smile was radiant, innocent, full of a future that was finally free. Charlotte smiled back, the first real, genuine, unguarded smile she had worn in months. She had fought. She had endured. She had survived. And now, at last, she could begin to live 3 months later. Charlotte sat on the terrace of the Manhattan penthouse. Her penthouse now. The skyline glittered before her, a million lights against the velvet darkness, a million stories unfolding in windows she would never see into. Eleanor was sleeping in the nursery. The baby monitor sat on the table beside Charlotte's wineglass, transmitting the soft, steady sound of her daughter's breathing. The most beautiful music in the world. The trial had changed everything. Graham's apology video had been broadcast 3 weeks after the verdict. 32 minutes of primetime television carried by every major network. Graham sitting at a desk reading from a prepared statement, his face gray and haggard, his voice monotone. 93 million people had watched it live. Hundreds of millions more had seen clips and excerpts in the days that followed. The memes had been merciless. Graham Holt kneeling in the courtroom. Graham Holt reading his apology like a hostage video. Graham Holt finally getting what he deserved. His board had removed him as CEO within 2 weeks of the verdict. The company he had inherited from his father, the empire Deacon had built from nothing, wanted nothing to do with him. He was a liability now, a joke, a cautionary tale that business schools would study for decades. Sienna had left for Europe the day after the verdict was announced. Paris first, Charlotte had heard, then Milan, then somewhere in Switzerland. She sent no messages, made no contact. Charlotte did not know where she was now, and she did not particularly want to know. That chapter was closed. 14 other women had come forward after the trial. 14 women who had been hurt by Graham over the years. 14 women who had signed NDAs and taken settlements and stayed silent out of fear and shame and the certain knowledge that no one would believe them. Now they were speaking. Now they were being heard. Now Graham faced a tsunami of civil lawsuits that would keep his remaining lawyers busy for years. The settlements alone would likely cost him everything he had left. Charlotte did not take pleasure in that, but she did not feel sorry for him either. He had made his choices. Now he was living with the consequences. Deacon had died 6 weeks after his testimony, peacefully, in his sleep, at a hospice facility in Connecticut. Charlotte had sent flowers to the funeral, but had not attended. She had said her goodbye to him at the diner that afternoon when he had given her the flash drive and his word. But she had honored his final wish. The foundation he had established for victims of domestic abuse was thriving. Charlotte sat on the board. She had helped design programs for women escaping abusive relationships, emergency housing, legal aid, counseling services, job training, all the things that women needed to rebuild their lives after leaving monsters like Graham. It was not enough. It would never be enough to undo all the damage that had been done. But it was something, a start, a seed that might grow into something larger. Vera Morrison's article in The Atlantic had won a Pulitzer Prize. It was called The Acquisition: How Billionaire Graham Holt Weaponized Marriage. It told Charlotte's story and the stories of the 14 other women and the story of a system that allowed men like Graham to flourish for so long. Charlotte had read it exactly once. Then she had put it away and never looked at it again. The past was the past. She was focused on the future now. Harper visited every weekend. They would sit on this same terrace, drink wine or tea depending on their moods, and talk about nothing important. Books they were reading, shows they were binging. The annoying patron at the library who kept trying to return books he had clearly damaged himself. The ordinary, mundane business of living. It was wonderful. Charlotte's mother had moved into the penthouse for a while after the trial, just to help with Eleanor, just to make sure Charlotte was okay. But last month, Margot had returned to her brownstone on the Upper East Side. "You don't need me anymore," she had said, standing in the foyer with her overnight bag in hand. "You're stronger than you ever knew, and Eleanor is lucky to have you as her mother." Charlotte had hugged her, long and hard, feeling like a child again, just for a moment, safe in her mother's arms. "Thank you," she had whispered, "for everything, for being there, for believing me, for having that business card ready even when you hoped you would never have to use it." Margot had smiled, kissed her daughter's forehead, and walked out into the May sunshine. Now Charlotte sat alone on the terrace thinking about everything that had happened. The woman she had been a year ago, naive and trusting, believing that love conquered all. The woman she was now, harder and wiser, knowing that love was not enough, that you also needed strength and courage and a willingness to fight for yourself. She caught herself reaching for her phone. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock. An old habit ingrained over years of anxiously checking for messages from Graham, looking for his approval, waiting for his attention, measuring her worth by his responses. She stopped, smiled at herself, put the phone away. She did not need his approval anymore. She did not need anyone's approval. She knew her own worth now, and that was enough. The next morning, Margot came by for coffee. They sat together in the living room while Eleanor played on a blanket nearby, gnawing happily on a teething ring. The baby was almost 11 months old now. She had her mother's eyes and her grandmother's stubborn chin. She was beautiful. "You're different now," Margot observed. It was not a question. Charlotte considered the observation. "I am. How do you feel?" Charlotte thought about it, really thought about it. "I used to think strength meant not breaking," she said slowly, watching Eleanor reach for a stuffed elephant, holding everything together no matter what, smiling through the pain, pretending everything was fine even when it wasn't. She paused. "Now I know that's not strength. That's just survival. That's just endurance. Real strength is different." "What is real strength?" Charlotte turned to look at her mother, at this woman who had raised her alone after her father died, who had weathered her own storms, who had built her own life on the ashes of her own losses. "Real strength is breaking," Charlotte said, "letting yourself break, feeling everything, even when it hurts. And then, when you're ready, picking up the pieces and building something new." She smiled, being honest about the fact that some pieces don't fit back together, that you're not the same person you were before, that you never will be, and being okay with that. Margot's eyes were wet. She reached over and squeezed Charlotte's hand. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." "I know." Charlotte squeezed back. "I think I'm finally proud of myself." 1 year later, Charlotte stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom. 500 faces looked up at her from round tables covered in white linen, from chairs arranged in neat rows, from standing room spaces along the walls. Survivors, advocates, supporters, journalists, people who had traveled from all over the country to attend the National Conference on Domestic Abuse Awareness, people who had experienced what she had experienced, people who had fought their own battles, people who understood. She had been asked to give the keynote speech. At first, she had said no, Public speaking still terrified her. Sharing her story even now still felt like ripping open a wound. But then she had thought about the woman on the bench, the stranger who had sat down beside her in that courthouse hallway and told her that her fight mattered, who had said she wished she'd had Charlotte's courage. If Charlotte's voice could help even one person find their own courage, it was worth the fear. I was forced to kneel when I was 8 months pregnant. The words fell into the silence of the ballroom. 500 people held their breath. My husband forced me to my knees in the foyer of our home, made me apologize to his mistress for recognizing his betrayal. He thought he was breaking me. He thought he was showing me my place. He thought he was proving that his power was absolute, that his will was law, that I was nothing more than property to be used and discarded. Charlotte paused. Let the memory wash over her one last time. Let herself feel it. Let herself remember. And I stayed down, not because I was weak, but because I didn't know standing up was an option. I didn't know I could fight back. I didn't know my voice mattered. I didn't know the truth had power. She looked out at the crowd, saw tears on some faces, recognition on others, anger, hope, pain, healing, all of it mixed together. Now I know, standing up is always an option, even when your knees shake, even when the world tells you to stay down, even when everyone around you says to be quiet, to be polite, to not make waves, to accept your lot and be grateful for what you have. Her voice strengthened. You have the right to make waves. You have the right to be loud. You have the right to take up space. You have the right to demand dignity and respect and love that doesn't hurt. She thought about Eleanor, about her daughter, now 2 years old, who would never know a world where her mother accepted being treated like property, who would grow up knowing that women fight back. That truth matters, that justice is possible. We rise, Charlotte said, not because it's easy, not because we're not afraid. We rise because it's the only way forward. We rise because our daughters are watching. We rise because the women who came before us didn't always have the chance to. We rise because we deserve better, because we are better. She took a breath, smiled. So stand up, speak up, fight back. And when they try to push you down, when they try to silence you, when they try to make you small, remember this: you are not alone. You are never alone. And you are so much stronger than you know. The applause started slowly, a few claps, then more, then a wave of sound that built and built until it became something thunderous, something physical, something that Charlotte felt in her bones. She stepped back from the podium. Her heart was pounding. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. She had done it. She had told her story. She had used her voice. And somewhere in that crowd, she knew someone who was hearing it who needed to, someone who was where Charlotte had been 3 years ago, someone who didn't know yet that standing up was an option. That night, Charlotte went home, paid the babysitter, checked on Eleanor, who was sleeping peacefully in her toddler bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and picture books. She sat down on the edge of the bed, watched her daughter sleep, watched the gentle rise and fall of her chest, watched her tiny fist clutched around her favorite stuffed elephant. You will never kneel for anyone, she whispered. Not ever. You hear me, Eleanor Charlotte Weston? Not for anyone. Not for any reason, not in any world. Eleanor stirred in her sleep, smiled, as if she understood. Charlotte leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead. Then she stood and walked to the window. The city glittered outside. Manhattan. The city where everything had fallen apart. The city where she had rebuilt herself from the ashes. The city that would always be part of her story, for better and worse. She thought about Graham. She heard he was living in the Hamptons now, in a house that was modest by his former standards, avoiding the public eye, fighting the endless lawsuits from the women who had finally found their voices. She did not hate him anymore. She did not love him anymore either. She felt nothing for him at all. He was a chapter that had ended, a book that had been closed, a part of her past that had no place in her future. The recording still existed on her phone. Sometimes, late at night, she listened to it, not to torture herself, not to relive the pain, but to remember, to mark the distance she had traveled, to appreciate how far she had come. From a woman on her knees to a woman standing tall. From a wife who apologized for existing to a mother who demanded better. From silence to voice. From fear to freedom. From broken to whole. Charlotte turned away from the window, walked to her bedroom, changed into pajamas, brushed her teeth, washed her face. She lay down in bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, closed her eyes. The city hummed outside her window. The baby monitor crackled softly with Eleanor's breathing. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, full of the sounds of a life rebuilt. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new victories, new opportunities to grow and learn and become. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for tonight, Charlotte Weston slept, deeply, peacefully, without dreams, because the nightmares were finally over, and the rest of her life was waiting. And that is the story of Charlotte Weston, the woman who refused to stay on her knees. If this story touched your heart, if it made you angry, if it gave you hope, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Leave a comment below. Tell me what moment hit you the hardest. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that fighting back is always an option. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join our family. We tell stories that matter. Until next time, stay strong and never kneel.